So I was going through this massive, just huge stack of research you sent over on all these ancient texts.
Oh, yeah, it's a lot to get through.
It really is. But I kept noticing something kind of strange. What blew my mind wasn't actually, what was written on the pages.
Right, it's what isn't there.
Exactly. It was what was completely missing. There were these massive, glaring holes in some of the most famous stories in human history.
And looking at how people reacted to those holes over the centuries is just fascinating.
Yeah, I realized humans apparently just cannot stand a blank space, at all.
No, we really can. It is this profound psychological quirk that we all have.
Right.
If you give a human being a story with a missing chapter, they won't just accept the mystery. They will build an entire industry around writing that chapter themselves.
It actually got me thinking about old antique maps. Those faded parchment ones from, the 15th century.
I love those with the elaborate compass roses and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there is always a point on those maps where the cartographer's actual geographical knowledge just stops. But they never leave the edge of the parchment blank.
They draw a sea monster.
Yes. They sketch this giant squid pulling down a galleon, or they literally just write, "Here be dragons."
Because a blank space on a map implies ignorance, and, ignorance is deeply unsettling for us.
It's terrifying, honestly.
It is. The monster, ironically, is comforting. It fills the void with something we can conceptualize, even if that thing is terrifying. It basically gives the unknown a face.
So today, for you listening, we are going looking for those sea monsters. We are exploring what academics call the epistemological margins of the canon.
Which is a very fancy way of saying...
Right, since we try to avoid academic jargon whenever possible here. Let's just translate that. We're looking at what happens when humanity's most sacred texts leave out the most crucial details.
When a foundational narrative just skips over something huge.
Exactly. So our mission in this deep dive is to explore the historical papers, the apocryphal texts, and the deep scholarly analyses that reveal how ancient writers, mystics, and even some pretty audacious modern hoaxers rushed in to fill those mysterious gaps.
Academics actually call those gaps lacunae. And the texts we are going to look at today, the ones that fill those lacunae, they aren't just idle fantasies.
They have a purpose.
A huge purpose. That is the core psychological framework I really want to establish right from the start. Human beings have a natural, almost biological abhorrence of a narrative vacuum.
We just can't let it go.
No, we can't. When a foundational text is silent, our imagination rushes in to answer the profound why and how questions. These texts are highly functional.
So they're tools.
Exactly. They're tools designed to solve massive theological or societal problems.
And we're going to cover a lot of ground today to prove that. We are going to look at the cosmic origins of demons.
Always a light topic.
Oh, yeah, very breezy. We'll look at a Bronze Age background extra who basically gets elevated to a heavenly high priest. We'll trace the 4,000-year evolution of a female night demon.
That one is a wild ride.
It really is. We'll sit in on a desperate king's midnight seance, uncover a bizarre text depicting the child Jesus with terrifying superpowers, and then we'll unpack a 19th century hoax about Jesus studying in India.
And all of that stems from just a handful of missing sentences.
It's wild. Let's start with what has to be the oldest and honestly the most bizarre gap of all, the pre-flood gap.
Ah, yes. Genesis chapter 6.
Right. In the canonical book of Genesis, right before the Great Flood, there is this incredibly cryptic passage. It's Genesis 6, verses 1 to 4. I actually wrote it down because it's so strange.
Let's hear it.
So it says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, took them as wives, and produced offspring called the Nephilim, who were the heroes of old, men of renown.
And then pretty much immediately after this, God decides the world is entirely corrupt and floods the earth.
Which is such a massive escalation. If you are just reading that as a normal person today, you are left completely confused.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, who on earth are these sons of God? And how does intermingling with them lead to the destruction of the entire world?
It is a massive narrative cliffhanger. I mean, in the canonical Hebrew Bible, it functions merely as a brief, somewhat jarring transition to set the stage for Noah.
It just kind of drops it in there.
Right. It establishes that the world had become corrupted, but the text doesn't explain the mechanics of that corruption at all. It just says these beings had children and then everything went terribly wrong.
But there's another text that fills this in, right?
Yes. If we turn to the non-canonical Book of Enoch, specifically the oldest section, which is called the Book of the Watchers.
And that dates back to when?
Around the 4th or 3rd century BCE. When we look at that text, we see this tiny 4-verse gap blown up into an epic cosmic drama.
I read the summary of this in the notes,
Yeah.
and honestly, it reads like a script for a blockbuster sci-fi movie.
It really does.
The Book of Enoch doesn't just give us vague hints. It names names. It tells us exactly who these sons of God were.
They were angels, specifically a class of angels known as the Watchers. And Enoch doesn't just say they happened to wander down to Earth and fall in love.
It was planned, right?
Highly planned. It describes a coordinated, deliberate mutiny. According to the text, 200 of these Watchers gather on the summit of Mount Hermon.
200 of them. That's an army.
Basically, yeah. And they're led by figures named Semjaza and Azazelel. What's fascinating here is that Semjaza is actually hesitant at first.
Oh, really? He gets cold feet.
He does. He knows that abandoning their heavenly station is a massive transgression. He actually tells the others he doesn't want to take the punishment alone.
So they form a pact to make sure nobody backs out.
Yes, they bind themselves by a mutual oath, an anathematic oath, which means they literally curse themselves if they back out of the plan.
That is intense.
It's a dark pact. They agree to descend to Earth, take human wives, and have children, knowing full well it completely defies the divine order.
I'm trying to picture how ancient readers process this. Because when I read it, I don't just see a story about angels misbehaving.
What do you see?
I see a story about a massive containment breach. It reminds me of that movie trope, like Jurassic Park or a Level 4 biolab, where scientists deliberately let a dangerous pathogen out.
That's a great analogy, actually.
Because the Watchers aren't just breaking a rule about dating humans, they are breaking a fundamental divine quarantine. Because, well, they don't arrive empty-handed, do they?
No, they don't. And that is where the real mechanism of the world's corruption comes in. They bring forbidden knowledge with them.
Like forbidden technology.
Exactly. The text says these angels impart heavenly wisdom and hidden sciences to humanity. And look at what they specifically teach. Azazel teaches humans metallurgy.
So how to make weapons.
Right, how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. But he also teaches them about metals and the art of making cosmetics, like beautifying the eyelids.
Okay, wait, hold on. I get the swords and shields. You teach humans how to make advanced weapons, they're going to kill each other faster. That obviously causes corruption. But cosmetics. Why is eyeshadow treated with the same level of horror as weapons of mass destruction?
It's a great question. To the ancient worldview producing this text, both are forms of unnatural manipulation.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So metallurgy alters the earth to create instruments of death. Cosmetics alter the natural human form to artificially enhance sexual attraction, which, in their minds, leads to the very intermingling that caused the angels to fall in the first place.
Oh, I see. It's all about crossing boundaries.
Exactly. And other angels teach enchantments, root cuttings for medicine, and astrology. Astrology attempts to read the divine secrets of the heavens. All of these are seen as illicit technologies.
So they're basically fast-tracking human civilization using knowledge that humans were never meant to have.
Yes, they're crossing sacred boundaries.
So it's not just that they had kids. It's that they gave humanity the cheat codes for civilization, and we immediately use those codes to destroy ourselves.
Pretty much.
And speaking of those kids, the Nephilim. Genesis just calls them heroes of old, which sounds almost noble, but Enoch paints a horrifying picture.
It is a truly terrifying depiction. In Enoch, the Nephilim are giant hybrids, and their primary characteristic is an insatiable appetite.
Like they just eat everything.
Everything. The text describes how they consume all the acquisitions of men, and when the humans can no longer feed them, the giants turn on the humans and devour them.
That is dark.
It gets worse. Then they begin to sin against birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish, and eventually they start devouring each other's flesh and drinking the blood.
Wow. So it's a portrait of a world entirely consumed by violence and bloodlust.
Driven by beings that simply shouldn't exist.
Which perfectly explains why God sends the flood. You have to wash the earth clean of this contamination.
It provides the justification that Genesis skipped over.
But here's the part of the Book of Enoch that really caught my attention because it solves a huge lingering problem for the reader.
The demon problem.
Yes. So God sends the flood, the giants drown, problem solved, right?
Right. It's not solved. Because we obviously still have evil in the world today. So how does Enoch account for that?
This is where the text becomes a brilliant piece of theological engineering. The physical bodies of these giants are destroyed in the flood, sure. But you have to remember their genetics, for lack of a better term.
Half angel, half human.
Right. They were born of immortal angels and mortal women. They have a dual nature. Their physical, earthly forms die in the water, but their spiritual, angelic half cannot perish.
So they basically become ghosts.
Essentially, yes. Enoch explains that the restless, disembodied spirits of these dead giants are condemned to remain on earth. They cannot ascend to heaven, but their bodies are gone.
That sounds miserable.
And it makes them angry. These wandering spirits become the evil spirits, the demons that continue to plague humanity.
Oh, wow.
The text explicitly states that these spirits will cause violence, corruption, disease, and suffering until the final judgment. That is incredibly elegant in a really dark way. If you think about the psychological function of that story, I mean, if you are an ancient person and you believe in a single all-powerful good God who created everything,
Right.
how do you explain your child getting sick? How do you explain a neighboring army just slaughtering your village? If God is good, why is the world so bad?
And Enoch steps in and says, it's not God's fault, and frankly, it's not entirely our fault either.
It's the lingering radioactive fallout from this ancient angelic rebellion. It literally gives evil a tangible origin story.
It provides a scapegoat. It creates a structured demonology to fill the gap in Genesis, answering the problem of evil without compromising the goodness of the Creator.
Okay, so that is how human imagination fills a gap to explain ultimate evil. But what happens when the gap surrounds someone who is inherently good?
That's a great pivot.
Right, because we just saw a few vague verses turn into a cosmic disaster. Let's look at how a few vague verses can elevate a human being into a god. I really want to talk about Melchizedek.
This is a perfect counterpoint to the Watchers. Melchizedek is one of the most enigmatic figures in the entire Hebrew Bible. His baseline appearance is incredibly brief.
Yeah, let's lay out the baseline for you listening. We're in Genesis again, chapter 14.
Yeah.
Abraham, well, he's Abram at this point, has just won this major battle to rescue his nephew Lot.
Right, he's on his way back.
He's heading home. And suddenly, this guy Melchizedek just walks onto the page. He is identified as the king of Salem and a priest of El Elyon, God Most High.
And he performs a very quick action.
Yeah, he brings out bread and wine. He gives Abraham a blessing. Abraham gives him a tenth of all the spoils of war. And then Melchizedek just vanishes.
He just walks right back off the page.
Exactly. He gets one other tiny mention in Psalm 110, which just says to a future king, you are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. And that's it. That's the entirety of his canonical resume.
He is the ultimate minor character. He appears out of nowhere with no genealogy, which, by the way, is highly unusual for Genesis.
Because Genesis is usually like, so-and-so begets so-and-so for pages.
Exactly, but he performs a quick ritual and disappears. But if we fast forward about 1,000 years to the community living at Qumran...
These are the people who wrote and preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls, right?
Yes. We find a document there called 11Q13. It's often just called the Melchizedek document. It dates to around 100 BCE.
And in this scroll, Melchizedek has had a serious promotion.
A complete metamorphosis. The Qumran community didn't view him as just a Bronze Age king who handed out snacks to Abraham. In 11Q13, Melchizedek is portrayed as an immortal, celestial deliverer.
Wait, really?
Yes, he is the high priest of the heavenly court.
I was trying to think of a good way to explain this to you guys. It's not just taking a background character and giving them a spin-off. It's like taking a random extra from a Marvel movie.
Like the guy drinking coffee in the background.
Yeah. The guy drinking coffee while Iron Man flies by. And you write an entire new script where it turns out the coffee guy is actually the supreme, omnipotent creator of the multiverse in disguise.
It's a massive leap.
How on earth did the authors of this scroll get from king with bread to cosmic savior?
They achieved this through a very specific mechanism of ancient Jewish interpretation called midrash.
Midrash. What exactly does that entail?
Midrash is a way of deeply interrogating a text, often pulling together entirely separate verses of scripture to reveal a hidden, deeper meaning. The author of 11Q13 focused heavily on the laws of the Jubilee found in Leviticus 25.
Let me stop you there because we need to explain the Jubilee. From what I understand, that was a purely economic law.
Right, on the surface, yes.
Like every 50 years, ancient Israel was supposed to hit a giant reset button. All debts are forgiven, indentured servants are freed, and any ancestral land that had been sold off is returned to its original family.
Correct. It was an earthly mechanism designed to prevent permanent, multi-generational poverty.
Which is actually a pretty progressive economic system for the ancient world.
It really was. But the author of 11Q13 takes this earthly economic concept and applies midrash to elevate it to a cosmic scale.
So they scale it up.
They argued that if there is an earthly jubilee for money and land, there must be an ultimate eschatological jubilee at the end of time.
And eschatological just means dealing with the end of the world, like the final judgment.
Exactly. Well, let me rephrase. Yes, it refers to the end of days. In this text, Melchizedek is the figure who brings about this final jubilee. But he isn't balancing accounting books.
So what debts is he forgiving?
The debts he is forgiving are sins. He is liberating the righteous from the spiritual debt of their transgressions and freeing them from the dominion of dark spirits.
And he's not just sitting at a desk stamping forgiven on people's files either.
Oh, yeah.
The text says he's leading an army.
He is a warrior. The scroll prophesies that Melchizedek will execute divine vengeance on a figure named Belial.
Belial?
Yes, in Qumran literature, Belial is the prince of darkness, the king of wickedness. Melchizedek is depicted as the head of the sons of heaven, leading a literal war against the forces of darkness to rescue the righteous.
Okay, this is where I have to push back a little bit, because I read the translation of 11Q13 in the notes, and there was a line that made me do a double take.
The divine titles.
Yes, the text actually applies divine titles to Melchizedek. It calls him El and Elohim. Those are the Hebrew words for God.
Right.
Now, everything I know about ancient Judaism says they were fiercely monotheistic. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. So how can this community call Melchizedek Elohim? Are they slipping back into polytheism? Are they worshiping a second God?
That is the exact question that has caused intense debate among scholars. It's a great observation. To understand it, we have to understand that our modern definition of the word God with a capital G is a bit rigid compared to the ancient Near Eastern worldview.
Rigid how?
Well, in ancient Israelite theology, there is a prominent concept known as the divine council.
The divine council, like a boardroom in heaven.
Quite literally, yes. The belief was that Yahweh, the supreme God, presided over a heavenly assembly of spiritual beings. We see traces of this in the canonical Bible, actually.
Really? Wait.
Psalm 82, for instance. It says that God presides in the great assembly and gives judgment among the gods, and the text uses the word Elohim there.
So Elohim isn't necessarily a specific name for the one creator God? It can just be a job title or a category of being?
It is a category. It refers to a being from the spiritual realm. So when the Qumran community calls Melchizedek Elohim, they are not saying he is the uncreated creator of the universe.
Okay, that makes more sense.
They are identifying him as an exalted heavenly being, perhaps a chief archangel, who acts as the supreme authorized agent of Yahweh. He is deputized. He carries the authority of God to bring justice and atonement.
So he fills the gap. The Hebrew Bible says God will judge the wicked and save the righteous, but the Qumran community wanted to know how.
Right. What is the mechanism?
What is the mechanism of salvation? Who is going to lead the charge? They looked at the mysterious, unaccounted-for priest-king Melchizedek and said, it's him. He is the agent of our rescue.
Precisely. They took a narrative void and filled it with a champion.
But we just saw how a text can elevate a human to a god. What happens when the canon's internal logic breaks down entirely?
Oh, this is where it gets really messy.
Right, when a text contradicts itself so badly that ancient readers had to invent a monster just to make the math work. That brings us to our third gap and the 4,000-year evolution of a figure named Lilith.
The story of Lilith is arguably one of the most stunning examples of textual evolution in human history. To understand her, we have to look at a glaring contradiction right at the beginning of the Bible.
Right. We are back in Genesis again, and if you read closely, there are two distinct, conflicting accounts of how humanity was created.
Yes.
In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, it says, God created mankind in his own image. Male and female, he created them. It heavily implies that man and woman were created simultaneously, both from the earth, both equal.
But then you turn the page to Genesis chapter 2,
Yeah.
and starting in verse 18, you get a completely different sequence of events.
The famous one.
Exactly. Adam is created first, from the dust. He is alone. God has him name all the animals, but none of them are suitable partners. So later on, God puts Adam into a deep sleep, takes one of his ribs, and builds Eve.
So if you are an ancient reader, reading this text as the literal, infallible word of God,
Yeah.
you have a massive math problem.
You do.
Genesis 1 says man and woman were made at the same time. Genesis 2 says the woman was made later, out of the man. You can't have it both ways. Who is the woman in Genesis 1? Where did she go?
The textual gap demands a character, and the ancient rabbis found the name for this missing character hidden in a single, incredibly obscure word later in the Bible.
Just one word.
Yes, The name Lilith appears exactly once in the canonical Hebrew Bible. It's in the book of Isaiah, chapter 34, verse 14.
I actually looked this verse up because I was so curious. It's a prophecy about the destruction of the land of Edom. It's describing a total wasteland, saying it will be inhabited by wild animals.
It lists all these desert creatures.
Yeah, it lists hyenas, wildcats, goat demons, and then it says, the Lilith shall repose there. Now, depending on the English translation you read, that word gets translated as screech owl or night monster. But my question is, how do you get a first wife out of an owl? Where did Isaiah even get this word?
Isaiah didn't invent the word. He borrowed it from the surrounding culture. To find the origin of Lilith, we have to dig deep into ancient Mesopotamian history.
Okay, let's dig.
The Hebrew term Lilith is linguistically linked to the Akkadian word Lilitu and the Sumerian word Lil. In those ancient cultures, these were not birds. They were female wind spirits or night demons.
And they were vicious, right? The sources mention a terrifying terracotta plaque from ancient Babylon called the Burney Relief.
That's a famous artifact, yes.
It shows this beautiful, naked woman with bird wings and the talon feet of a bird of prey. She is standing on lions and flanked by owls. And there's also a cameo in the ancient Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, where a demoness named Lilith literally lives in the trunk of a sacred hulupu tree until Gilgamesh scares her off into the wilderness.
Yes, the Lilitu demons were feared throughout the ancient Near East. They were specifically associated with sexual seduction, infertility, and most tragically, sudden infant mortality.
That is awful.
They were the monsters of the night that preyed on pregnant women and newborns.
So you have this ancient Mesopotamian night demon on one hand, and you have this missing woman from Genesis 1 on the other.
Yeah.
How do they connect?
They connect in the 8th century CE in a text called the Alphabet of Ben Sira.
What kind of text is that?
It was a satirical, often bawdy Jewish text, and the anonymous author of this text used the mechanism of midrash to violently smash these two concepts together, closing the narrative gap in Genesis forever.
And this is the moment the famous origin story of Lilith is born. Walk us through exactly what the Alphabet of Ben Sira says happened in the Garden of Eden.
The text asserts that Lilith was the unnamed woman from Genesis 1. She was Adam's first wife. Crucially, because she was created from the same earth as Adam at the exact same time, she demanded absolute equality.
And the text gets surprisingly explicit about what that equality meant, right?
It does. It frames their conflict around their physical, sexual relationship. Lilith refuses to be submissive. She refuses to lie beneath Adam, stating, "We are equal to each other in as much as we were both created from the earth."
But Adam refuses to yield. He insists on dominance. So what does Lilith do? She doesn't just stick around and argue.
No, she pronounces the ineffable name of God.
That says the name.
Well, in ancient mysticism, knowing and speaking the secret name of God grants immense magical power. By speaking it, Lilith grows wings, and she literally flies out of the Garden of Eden. She flees to the region of the Red Sea, an area heavily associated with demons and dark magic.
So God sends 3 angels to bring her back. Their names are Sanoi, Sansonoi, and Samanzloth. They track her down at the Red Sea and tell her to come back to Adam, where she will be severely punished.
And her response is wild.
It really is. She refuses. She chooses permanent exile over submission.
And the punishment she receives is horrific. The text states that 100 of her demonic children will die every day.
100 a day.
Yes. And in retaliation for this daily slaughter of her offspring, Lilith swears a dark vow. She declares that she will prey on human newborns, strangling them in their sleep.
But there is a loophole, right?
Yes. She promises that if she sees an amulet bearing the names or images of those 3 angels, Sanoi, Sansonoi, and Samanjaloth, hanging over a child's bed, she will spare the infant.
I really want to pause and look at the mechanics of what this story is doing, because it's heartbreaking. Infant mortality in the ancient and medieval world was staggeringly high.
It was a constant looming threat.
Imagine the trauma of sudden infant death syndrome back then. Waking up to find your baby has passed away for absolutely no visible reason. You need an explanation.
You are desperate for one.
The Alphabet of Ben Sira provides one. It takes a contradiction in a holy book and engineers it into a coping mechanism for grief. It gives parents a face for the tragedy, a demon, and more importantly, it gives them an action to take. If I hang this amulet, I can protect my child.
It is a functional narrative, exactly as we discussed. But her evolution didn't stop in the 8th century. By the Middle Ages, Kabbalistic texts like the Zohar took Lilith and elevated her to a level of cosmic metaphysical evil.
Like beyond just a demon.
Right. She was no longer just a baby-snatching demon. She became the consort of Semeril, the archdemon. She became the ultimate embodiment of the other side, what Kabbalists call the Sitra Ara. She became the dark mirror to the divine feminine.
She represented everything that threatened the rigid patriarchal order of the time, right? Female autonomy, unchecked sexuality, and the destruction of the family line. She was the ultimate nightmare.
But history is not static. Texts evolve based on who is reading them. And this brings us to a fascinating modern shift.
And we should mention, we are just reporting on this objectively, without taking a stance on which interpretation is correct, because the evolution itself is what matters here.
Absolutely. In the late 20th century, modern feminist theologians and artists looked back at the alphabet of Ben Sira and completely inverted the meaning of the text.
Yeah. Writers like the theologian Judas Plasko re-examined the story. They stripped away the demonic propaganda and looked at the core action. Here was a woman who was created equal to man, who demanded to be treated as an equal, and when the patriarchal system refused, she just walked away.
They didn't see a monster.
No, they saw a pioneer. Lilith's exile wasn't a divine punishment for being evil. It was the price she consciously chose to pay for her own independence.
We see this cultural reclamation everywhere in the past century. John Collier's famous pre-Raphaelite painting depicts her not as a monster, but as a confident, beautiful woman wrapped in a serpent, entirely self-possessed.
Dante Gabriel Rossetti wrote poetry about her power.
Yes.
And you can't forget the Lilith Fair. In the late 1990s, Sarah McLachlan organized this massive all-female music festival that toured the country and raised millions for women's charities.
That's right.
It took a name that for thousands of years was whispered in terror as the murderer of children, and they stamped it on T-shirts as an emblem of female empowerment and autonomy.
It is a staggering transformation.
It's like tracking a linguistic virus as it mutates to survive in different cultural hosts. She starts as a Sumerian wind demon living in a tree. She gets a cameo as a scriptural owl in Isaiah to balance a geographical prophecy.
Right.
Then she gets engineered into Adam's rebellious ex-wife to solve a Genesis math problem. She morphs into a Kabbalistic queen of darkness. And finally, she transforms into a modern emblem of equality. The gap in the text never changed, but the human needs filling it changed dramatically.
It proves that these texts are alive. But so far, we have been talking about textual gaps, missing characters or contradictions. Now, we are going to transition to a very different kind of gap.
Right.
Not a silence in the text, but the silence of God.
Right.
We are moving from unauthorized women of myth to a very real human woman who practice unauthorized supernatural arts.
We are heading to 1 Samuel chapter 28 and the deeply unsettling story of the medium of Endor.
This is one of the most debated, heavily analyzed narratives in the entire Hebrew Bible. And it's primarily because it deals with a reigning monarch deliberately violating his own laws to enter the forbidden realm of necromancy.
Let's set the physical and emotional scene here, because the context is everything. King Saul of Israel is at the end of his rope.
He is desperate.
The massive Philistine army has amassed at Shunem. Saul is camped at Gilboa. He looks out, sees this overwhelming force, and the text says he is terrified. His heart is pounding with fear. Naturally, as the king of Israel, he seeks divine guidance.
But God is completely silent.
Total radio silence. The text explicitly tells us that Saul inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him by dreams, nor by the Urim, which were the sacred lots used by the high priest for divination, nor by the prophets.
Saul is entirely cut off from the divine chain of command.
And to make matters worse, his mentor, the prophet Samuel, the man who actually anointed him king, has recently died. Saul is alone, panicked, and desperate. Now here is the tragic irony. Earlier in his reign, when he was zealously enforcing Torah law, Saul had banished all the mediums and spiritists from the land.
He made necromancy illegal, punishable by death, usually.
But desperation breeds hypocrisy. When the authorized channels of revelation are closed, Saul seeks an unauthorized one.
He turns to his servants and says, "Find me a woman who is a medium, so I may go and inquire of her." And they tell him there is one hiding in the village of Endor.
Which is pretty risky, right?
Very. Endor is actually behind enemy lines, relatively close to the Philistine camp. So Saul strips off his royal robes, puts on a disguise, and under the cover of night, sneaks across the terrain with 2 men to find this woman.
The Hebrew text uses a very specific, fascinating phrase to describe this woman. It calls her a baladov.
Right, and in English that usually just gets translated as medium or witch, but what does baladov actually mean?
I think the sources said it translates roughly to the mistress of the Ob or the possessor of a conjuring pit. To understand what is happening in this dark room, we have to look at the Canaanite ritual context.
Exactly. Scholars link the Hebrew word Ab to the ancient Hittite word Api. An Api was a sacrificial grave or a pit dug directly into the earth.
Wait, so when we picture a medium, we usually think of someone sitting at a table with a crystal ball, maybe holding hands in a circle. But you're saying a Baladov is doing something entirely different.
This is a chthonic ritual.
Chthonic meaning related to the underworld, like digging down into the dirt.
Exactly. She is likely digging a pit in the dirt floor, speaking into the earth, attempting to pull spirits up from the subterranean realm of the dead. It is a visceral, earthy practice.
And there's a detail in the sources about this ritual that absolutely chilled me. Because the seance happens, but afterward, the woman prepares a meal for Saul.
Right, the meal.
He's collapsed on the floor, exhausted, and she insists he eats. The text says she had a fattened calf in the house, which she killed, and she baked bread without yeast. On the surface, it sounds like ancient hospitality.
But the vocabulary reveals a darker mechanism. The Hebrew text doesn't use the common word for slaughtering an animal for dinner, which is zabak. It uses a closely related but distinct verb, zavak.
And what's the difference?
Zavak specifically means cultic ritual slaughter. It implies a religious sacrifice.
I don't buy that this was just a late-night snack to calm his nerves. The analysis here suggests Saul is crossing the ultimate line. Think about it. She performs a ritual slaughter. They are likely eating meat that still has blood in it, which is a massive violation of dietary law.
A huge violation.
They're eating unleavened bread, matzah, which is ritual bread. By eating this specific meal in this specific context, Saul isn't just getting his blood sugar up. He is participating in a necromantic covenant. He is sealing a dark pact with the realm of the dead.
He is cementing his alienation from God. And this alienation is brilliantly highlighted by a clash of religious paradigms during the seance itself.
How so?
Well, the woman begins the ritual, looks into the pit, and recoils in terror. Saul asks her what she sees. She replies, "I see Elohim coming up out of the earth."
Okay, there's that word again, Elohim. We just talked about this with Melchizedek, the divine council.
Yes, but notice her grammar. The word Elohim can be singular or plural. The medium uses a plural verb. She is saying, "I see gods coming up," or divine beings.
Oh, wow.
This perfectly reflects her polytheistic Canaanite worldview, where the dead ancestors and underworld spirits are viewed as minor deities.
But Saul doesn't want to hear about multiple gods. He is desperately clinging to his monotheistic framework. He completely ignores her theology and forces her plural back into a singular. He snaps at her. What does he look like?
It's a profound moment of psychological projection. Saul dictates the reality he needs to see. The medium answers, "An old man wearing a robe is coming up." And Saul immediately perceives that it is Samuel. He bows down with his face to the ground.
And here is where the narrative gap explodes into one of the most intense historical debates in theology. For centuries, church fathers, rabbis, and scholars have fought over one question. Who actually appeared in that room?
Was it a cheap parlor trick, or did she actually summon the dead?
Exactly.
Historically, there have been two main views among religious thinkers. The first view, held by early Jewish historians like Josephus and influential Christian church fathers like Origen and Augustine, is that the apparition was the real, literal, historical spirit of the prophet Samuel.
Which makes no sense to me. How could an illicit Canaanite medium, practicing a magic that God explicitly outlawed, have the power to drag a holy prophet out of paradise? That implies her magic is stronger than God's protection.
That is the exact tension. Those who hold the real Samuel view argue that the medium didn't actually have the power. They suggest that God hijacked the seance.
Hijacked it.
The argument is that God permitted Samuel to appear, overriding the witch's ritual, specifically to deliver a final, devastating judgment on Saul. They point out that the apparition speaks with Samuel's voice, speaks absolute truth, and accurately predicts Saul's death the next day.
But the second camp completely rejects that premise, right?
Vehemently. The second view was championed by thinkers like Tertullian and later writers in the Middle Ages. They argued that the apparition was absolutely a demonic impersonator.
Based on what?
Their logic is rooted in a strict spiritual hierarchy. Tertullian argued that it is ontologically impossible for a holy prophet of God to be disturbed, commanded, or summoned by a necromancer. Saints can cast out demons, but demons cannot summon saints.
Because that would upend the entire cosmic order.
Precisely. Therefore, According to this view, the apparition was a demonic entity, perfectly mimicking Samuel's appearance and voice, sent to deceive and destroy the king by driving him into despair.
And if you look closely at the text, there are details that really support the demon theory, or at least suggest this is not the real Samuel acting on God's orders. First of all, the apparition's opening line to Saul is a complaint. He says, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?"
It is a very strange response for a divine messenger.
It's incredibly petty. If this is God's holy prophet, sent by God on a final divine mission to speak truth to the king, why is he complaining about his nap being interrupted? And more importantly, why does the apparition give the medium the credit?
Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?
Exactly. A true prophet operates on God's orders, not a witch's incantations.
It implies a subservience to the ritual that contradicts divine sovereignty.
And then there's the prophecy itself. The apparition berates Saul, reminds him that God has torn the kingdom from him, and then drops this brutal hammer. "Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me, and the Lord will hand the army of Israel over to the Philistines."
It is a prophecy of absolute, inescapable doom.
But here's the thing. Biblical prophecy almost always contains a mechanism for repentance. Even when Jonah tells Nineveh they will be destroyed, they repent, and God spares them. This apparition offers no grace, just a death sentence.
And as several modern commentators point out, defeat in battle did not inevitably mean the death of the king and his entire lineage on the same day. Saul was the commander. He could have retreated. He could have surrendered.
Which leads to a truly provocative question raised by the analysts in our sources. What if the medium of Endor wasn't just performing a magic trick and wasn't summoning demons? What if she was waging psychological warfare?
Explain the mechanism of that.
Think about the power dynamic. Saul had systematically persecuted and murdered her people, the mediums and spiritists of Canaan. Now, the king who ordered the slaughter of her community crawls into her house in the middle of the night, terrified, weak, and vulnerable.
He literally hands her his mind.
By delivering, or at least facilitating, a prophecy of absolute unmitigated doom, what does she accomplish? She pushes a demoralized, clinically depressed king over the edge into total despair. Saul leaves her house completely broken.
And we know what happens next.
The very next day, rather than being captured, he commits suicide on the battlefield by falling on his own sword. Did the medium effectively avenge her persecuted craft by using a psychological weapon? Did she convince him he was already dead?
It is a chilling, brilliant reading of the text. Whether the apparition was a demon, the real Samuel, or a masterful psychological manipulation by the medium, the outcome remains the same. He sought an unauthorized narrative to fill the agonizing silence of God, and the narrative he received destroyed him.
We cannot tolerate a vacuum. Saul sought answers from the dead because he was terrified of his future. But as we move forward in history, we see a massive shift.
Early Christians weren't so much seeking answers about the future, they were obsessed with seeking answers about a past.
Specifically, they were fascinated by the hidden past of their Savior. Let's look at the childhood gap and a wild, almost unbelievable text known as the Infancy Gospel of Thomas.
The canonical Gospels of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, leave a massive narrative gap regarding the life of Jesus. We get the famous stories of his birth in Bethlehem.
The manger, the wise men.
Right. And Luke gives us one brief anecdote of Jesus in the temple at age 12 debating the teachers. But other than that, the years between his birth and his baptism by John at age 30 are entirely empty.
Those are the lost years. And again, human nature abhors a vacuum. If you were a 2nd century Christian living in the Roman Empire, you desperately want to know what Jesus was like as a kid.
Naturally.
Did he do miracles? Did he know he was God? Was he building perfect tables in the carpentry shop?
To fill this void, anonymous authors began writing apocryphal infancy gospels. They were essentially historical fan fiction designed to answer these questions. The most famous, and certainly the most controversial of these, is the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, or IGT.
And this is from the 2nd century.
It dates back to the 2nd century, yes. We know it was widely read because we have a very old Koine Greek papyrus fragment from the 4th or 5th century, and the earliest complete long form comes from an 11th century Greek manuscript called the Codex Sabbaticus.
And the Jesus depicted in this text, I genuinely don't know how else to say this, it defies every traditional expectation of a gentle, compassionate Savior. The expert sources refer to him as an enfant terrible.
The miracles in the IGT are bizarre, capricious, and often shockingly violent. Very. For example, the text opens with the story of a 5-year-old Jesus playing by a ford in a rushing stream. It is the Sabbath. He takes mud and clay and sculpts 12 sparrows.
Okay, innocent enough.
But a local Jewish man sees him doing this, and because making clay figures is considered work, he runs to tell Joseph that his son is breaking the Sabbath laws. Joseph comes and scolds Jesus.
And how does Jesus react? He doesn't apologize. He doesn't offer a theological defense. He just claps his hands, shouts at the clay birds, "Go, fly, and live, and remember me."
And the clay sparrows suddenly come to life and fly away chirping.
On one level, it's an incredible display of divine power, but he does it almost out of spite, just to win an argument and prove he doesn't have to follow the rules.
But the stories escalate very quickly into much darker territory. In another incident, a boy, specifically identified as the son of Annas the scribe, a figure of authority, takes a willow branch and disperses some pools of water that Jesus had carefully gathered.
Just normal kid stuff, splashing in puddles.
Jesus becomes furious. He curses the boy, declaring, "You shall wither like a tree and shall bear neither leaves nor root nor fruit."
Let me stop you there, because the text says immediately after Jesus says that, the boy's body literally dries up and he dies. He withers away into a husk.
It's shocking.
Wait, what? The Jesus of this text straight up murdered a kid over splashing in a puddle? How on earth did early Christians read this and think, "Ah, yes, our loving Savior"?
And that isn't even the only fatality. Shortly after, Jesus is walking through the village, and a boy runs past and accidentally bumps into his shoulder.
It bumps into him.
Jesus is annoyed. He turns to the boy and says, "You shall not go on your way." And the boy instantly falls down dead on the spot.
He kills a kid for bumping into him in traffic. The text says the parents of the dead boy are terrified. They go to Joseph and demand that he teach his son to bless and not to curse, because he is literally killing the neighborhood children.
And Joseph is helpless to stop him.
Yeah, when Joseph tries to pull Jesus aside and tell him to calm down, Jesus basically threatens Joseph, saying, "Anyone who crosses me will be punished."
There is also a remarkable story focused on Jesus' intellectual superiority. Joseph takes Jesus to a local school teacher named Zacchaeus to learn the Greek alphabet.
Okay, this sounds slightly less lethal.
Zacchaeus begins the lesson and tells Jesus to say the letter alpha. Jesus refuses to speak. Zacchaeus gets frustrated, perhaps threatens to hit him, and Jesus finally speaks up. But he doesn't recite the alphabet.
What does he do?
He demands that Zacchaeus first explain the hidden, mystical meaning of the letter alpha. When the teacher is stunned and unable to answer, Jesus mocks him in front of everyone, intimidates him, and declares, "I existed before the ages. I know when your fathers' fathers were born."
I always explain the Jesus of the infancy gospel of Thomas by comparing him to a toddler Superman who hasn't yet been taught human restraint by the Kents.
That's a very apt comparison.
Imagine giving ultimate cosmic omnipotence to a 5-year-old. 5-year-olds have quick tempers. They get annoyed when bumped into. They don't want to do their homework. The IGT Jesus wields ultimate divine power with the emotional maturity of a kindergartner.
It is deeply unsettling for modern readers who are used to the canonical portrait of Jesus as the Prince of Peace. But if we want to understand how texts work, we have to ask the mechanism question.
Right. Why did early Christians write and circulate this text? They weren't trying to cancel Jesus. They weren't trying to make him look evil.
No, they revered him. So how does a child murdering Jesus serve their theology?
Exactly. What is the function here?
It solves a massive theological problem for a specific audience. Early Christianity was spreading rapidly into the Greco-Roman world. In that culture, heroes, demigods, and emperors were expected to show evidence of their power from the cradle.
Like who?
Think of the myth of Hercules. While he is still an infant in his crib, Hera sends 2 venomous serpents to kill him. Infant Hercules simply grabs them and strangles them to death.
Oh, wow. So the Gentile converts are bringing their cultural expectations with them. They are saying, if your guy is the Son of God, what did he do when he was a kid? Did he just sit around doing nothing until he was 30?
Exactly. Furthermore, there are debates in the early church heresies like adoptionism.
What is adoptionism?
It's the argument that Jesus was just a normal human being who was adopted by God and given divine power only at his baptism. The Orthodox Church needed to crush that idea.
So they needed proof he was always divine.
The IGT functions like a superhero origin story tailored for a Greco-Roman audience. It proves aggressively that Jesus wasn't an ordinary human who leveled up. He was fully in possession of divine power, authority, and pre-existent knowledge from day one.
It fills the gap by screaming, "Don't worry, he was always in charge." even if it means portraying him as a terrifying neighborhood menace. It's fascinating how the function of the story was more important to them than the morality of the child's actions.
It really was.
But the IGT only filled the childhood gap. There's an even larger gap in the timeline, Jesus from age 12 to 30. And if ancient people used myth and folklore to fill their gaps, the 19th century used a completely different, much more sophisticated tool.
The literary hoax.
Yes. Let's look at the incredible story of Nicholas Notovich and the Jesus of India.
The Notovich affair is a masterclass in how the desire to fill a narrative gap intersects perfectly with the cultural obsessions of an era.
The year is 1894. A Russian-born Crimean adventurer and journalist named Nicholas Notovich publishes a book in French called The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. And the setup for this book, the framing device, is just brilliant. It's like something out of an Indiana Jones movie.
Notovich claims that in 1887 he was traveling in Ladakh, a remote mountainous region in the Himalayas of northern India.
Which was a very exotic, mysterious place for a 19th century reader.
Extremely. According to his highly detailed account, he fell off his horse and broke his leg. He was taken to the Hemes Monastery, an ancient Tibetan Buddhist enclave, to be nursed back to health by the monks.
And this is where the supposed miracle happens. While he's lying there, incapacitated, he claims the Buddhist lamas start reading to him to pass the time.
How convenient.
Right. And they're reading from these ancient Tibetan manuscripts, which they tell him were translated from original scrolls written in the Pali language. And these manuscripts tell the story of a prophet named Saint Isa. And Isa, Notovich realizes, is the Arabic and Islamic name for Jesus.
According to Notovich's translation of these manuscripts, which he allegedly furiously dictated into his notebooks, he had finally discovered exactly where Jesus was during those missing 18 years.
So what is the narrative? How does Notovich fill the gap? According to these discoveries, Jesus leaves Galilee in secret at age 13. He travels with a caravan of merchants along the Silk Road all the way to India.
He goes to holy cities like Jagannath, Rajagriha, and Benares.
And what is he doing there?
He spends 6 years deeply studying the Vedas and learning the tenets of Buddhism from the monks. The text claims that Isa became a spiritual master in his own right.
But he wasn't just a passive student, was he?
No, he challenged the local hierarchy. The manuscript says he preached vehemently against the rigid Hindu caste system, defending the lower castes, the Shudras, and Vaishyas. He blended Eastern philosophy with his own evolving theology.
And then what?
Finally, around age 29, feeling his education was complete, he traveled back through Persia and Afghanistan to return to Judea and begin his public ministry.
It is a staggering claim. It completely rewrites the foundations of Christianity by making Jesus a student of Buddhism. And the book was an absolute international sensation.
Oh, it sold incredibly well.
It was translated into English, German, Spanish, Italian. Everyone was reading it. It was a massive bestseller. There's just one tiny problem with the whole thing.
It was entirely fabricated.
A complete, total manufactured hoax.
Yes. Almost immediately after the book was published, serious scholars, philologists, experts in historical linguistics, and Christian missionaries traveled to the Hemes Monastery in Ladakh to verify Notovich's claims and see these manuscripts for themselves.
And what did they find?
When they arrived and interviewed the head lama, they found absolutely zero evidence. The monks had never heard of a Russian named Nicholas Notovich. No one had broken their leg there in recent memory.
And the manuscripts?
They had no manuscripts about St. Isa. In fact, when the scholars explained the premise of the book, the monks were highly offended by the suggestion that they were hiding a Christian gospel. Notovich had made the entire thing up.
It's incredible. I was trying to figure out an analogy for how he pulled this off, and it reminds me of a modern found footage horror movie like the Blair Witch Project.
That is a great comparison.
Or better yet, it's like someone today writing a piece of Harry Potter fan fiction, printing it on aged parchment, and convincing the world that J.K. Rowling hid it in a Swiss bank vault, and only they have the translation.
He built a myth around his myth.
Notovich didn't just write a story, he engineered a fake provenance. He gave it this incredibly detailed, realistic framing device. I was injured, I was stuck in a monastery, the monks translated it for me. That made the mechanism of discovery seem totally plausible to a 19th century reader.
He weaponized the 19th century manuscript trade. During that era, Western explorers were constantly emerging from the East with newly discovered, genuinely ancient texts. The public was primed to believe that the sands of Egypt or the monasteries of Tibet held lost secrets.
But what's truly fascinating here isn't just that he wrote a hoax. It's why it became a bestseller, even after it was widely debunked by the academic community. The philologists proved he was lying, but people kept buying the book. Why did people cling to it so desperately?
Because it capitalized on the cultural zeitgeist of the Victorian era. This was a period of intense Orientalism in the West.
Right, there was a huge obsession with Eastern culture.
Movements like Theosophy, led by figures like Helena Blavatsky, and spiritualism were hugely popular. There was a deep romanticized fascination with Eastern mysticism. Many people in the West were becoming disillusioned with the rigid dogma of institutional Christianity.
So they were looking for an alternative.
Yes, they were hungering for a more mystical, universally harmonized spiritual tradition.
So Notovich didn't just fill a gap. He filled it with exactly what his audience wanted to be true. He provided a Jesus who bridged the gap between East and West, between Christianity and Buddhism. A Jesus who validated the Victorian obsession with the Orient.
And that is why the myth survives. Even today, if you browse the internet or certain bookstores, you can find documentaries and spiritual guides claiming as absolute fact that Jesus went to India.
The hoax survives because the psychological desire for that harmonization survives.
It perfectly illustrates our core framework. A narrative vacuum will always draw in the anxieties, hopes, and desires of the culture looking into it.
Let's synthesize all of this because we've gone on quite a journey today.
We really have.
We looked at how the author of Enoch filled a cryptic 4-verse gap in Genesis with the terrifying rebellion of the Watchers, specifically to explain the agonizing origin of demons and evil in a world created by a good God.
We saw how the Qumran community looked at a guy who showed up for 2 seconds with bread and wine and used Midrash to elevate Melchizedek into a heavenly warrior, because they needed to assure themselves that cosmic justice and the forgiveness of sins were real.
We traced how a glaring contradiction in the 2 creation accounts of Genesis birthed Lilith. We watched her morph from a Mesopotamian wind demon used to explain the tragedy of infant mortality, into a Kabbalistic nightmare, and finally into a modern symbol of feminist empowerment.
We sat in the dark with King Saul and the medium of Endor, seeing how the terrifying silence of God drove a monarch to seek out a forbidden chthonic ritual, and how the narrative he received pushed him to his doom.
And we looked at how early Christians invented a superpowered toddler Jesus to prove his continuous divinity to a Greco-Roman audience, while the 19th century invented the Buddhist Jesus to satisfy their craving for Eastern mysticism.
When you pull all of these threads together, the overarching takeaway is profound. These apocryphal texts, these fierce historical debates, these elaborate literary hoaxes, they actually tell us very little about the divine reality they're supposedly trying to describe.
But they tell us absolutely everything about human psychology.
Exactly. We are a storytelling species that simply cannot tolerate an unfinished puzzle. We will forge the missing pieces ourselves, using whatever clay our current cultural moment provides.
It is a deeply ingrained human trait. And it doesn't just happen with ancient sacred texts, it operates in our daily lives.
I'd like you, the listener, to consider the gaps in your own life. Think about a situation where you don't have all the information. Say, a close friend suddenly stops texting you back for 3 days, or your boss calls an unexpected meeting on a Friday afternoon with no agenda attached.
Or you see a fragmented 10-second video clip on the news entirely devoid of context.
What do you do in those moments? You don't just sit patiently and wait for the facts to arrive.
No, you definitely don't. Your brain immediately begins to write an apocryphal text. You invent a story. You tell yourself your friend is angry with you because of something you said last week.
You tell yourself your boss is going to fire you.
You invent a massive political conspiracy to explain the video clip. You fill the blanks. And more importantly, the stories you invent to fill those blanks usually reveal your own underlying anxieties, fears, and biases.
We are all authors of our own personal apocrypha.
We really are. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Let's go all the way back to the beginning, to our map maker drawing sea monsters at the edge of the known world. We spent this whole time looking at how humans fill the gaps in foundational texts. But what if we look at it from the other side?
What do you mean by the other side?
What if the gaps in these foundational sacred texts aren't mistakes? What if they aren't editorial oversights or lost pages or clumsy writing? What if they are intentional negative spaces?
Intentional gaps.
Think about it. What if these lacunae were designed specifically to remain empty? If a sacred text is perfectly complete, with every single question answered, it becomes a static textbook. It's dead.
But a text with holes in it acts as a mirror.
Exactly. It forces every new generation to project their own deepest fears, highest hopes, and evolving values into the narrative in order to make sense of it. Maybe the gaps are exactly what keeps the story alive millennia later, because a completed map is just a reference document you put in a drawer. But a map with dragons at the edges, well, that is an invitation to explore.